Hello and welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort, a local Champaign-Urbana peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. We're recording this at midday on Tuesday, sorry, I got the wrong one here. We're recording this at midday on Tuesday, June 11th, in the studios of Urbana Public Television. Recordings of earlier programs and links to articles referred to today can be found on the Facebook page for Aware of Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. Our program concentrates on the news of U.S. war-making, which is generally not reported, not by accident, in the U.S. media. But today we're concentrating on identity politics, injustice caused by discrimination, while U.S. war-making is caused by exploitation at home and abroad. The poets often get there first. This is a communication from playwright C.J. Hopkins, an American in Germany. Quote, "So it appears we managed to survive another terrifying Quds Day in Berlin. It was certainly touch and go there for a while, what with the media issuing hysterical warnings about the hordes of Hamas and Hezbollah supporters, neo-Nazis, and conspiracy theorists that were going to materialize out of the ether, goose-stepping down the Kurfürstendamm and reenact Kristallnacht or something. The city was braced for an all-out Persian-Palestinian Quds Day pogrom." Quds refers to Jerusalem, and Quds Day is the last day of Ramadan. It's always a threat on Quds Day in Berlin, but the hysteria level this year was elevated due to the anti-Semitism pandemic that mysteriously erupted in 2016 for no apparent reason whatsoever. Okay, what you're probably asking is Quds Day. It's an annual event initiated by Iran to show support for the Palestinians in opposition to Zionism. It takes place on the last Friday of Ramadan, in opposition to Israel's Jerusalem Day, the national holiday commemorating Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem in the aftermath of the Six-Day War. In Berlin, there's an annual Quds Day march, which the German media typically respond to by whipping up anti-Semitism hysteria and fanatical guilt-ridden support for Israel. This year was no exception. On the contrary. A week or so before the event, Felix Klein, Germany's Commissioner for Jewish Life and the Fight Against Anti-Semitism, warned Jews not to wear kippahs in public, skullcaps, yarmulkes, on account of the unprecedented explosion of anti-Semitism throughout the country. According to the Interior Ministry, there were 62 violent anti-Semitic attacks in Germany during 2018, compared to 37 in 2017, which in a nation of 83 million people, and with a history of real-life goose-stepping Nazis, and of perpetrating the Holocaust and so on, well, you can understand the commissioner's real alarm. The international corporate media began spreading the news that anti-Semitism was once again on the march in Germany. The BBC reported that official figures showed that 1,646 hate crimes had been committed against Jews in 2018, up 10% from 2017. CNN reported that anti-Semitic hate crimes had increased by almost 20%. According to the Jerusalem Post, there were 1,800 anti-Semitic incidents committed against Jews in 2018. It was almost as if the anti-Semitism pandemic was retroactively metastasizing right before our eyes. But whatever. The statistics don't really matter. The point was, quote, Jews are not safe in Germany. The Putin Nazis had teamed up with the Iranian Nazis and the Syrian Nazis, who were backing the Palestinian Nazis, whose irrational hatred of the State of Israel the German Nazis had somehow weaponized, probably with a bunch of fake Facebook ads, and they were all going to storm the historic high-end shopping boulevard of West Berlin. The Kurfürstendamm that was mentioned a moment ago. Then on Friday, the day before Quds Day, in a desperate last-minute tactical maneuver, German politicians and cultural figures exhorted Jews and Gentiles alike to defiantly wear their kippahs on Quds Day. Bild, the leading German tabloid, even printed little cut-out Bild kippahs complete with meticulous assembly instructions, and called on Germans to wear them on Quds Day to show their solidarity with the State of Israel. With the Jewish people. The built kippah tactic was a huge success. On Quds Day, fewer than 1,000 people, many of them women and children, peacefully strolled along the Kurfürstendamm, chanting slogans like "Free, Free Palestine," and asking the world to stop the Israelis from penning people up in de facto ghettos, shooting their legs off with dum-dum bullets, demolishing their houses, hospitals, and schools, stealing their land, randomly murdering them, and otherwise behaving like sadistic fascists. The hordes of Hamas and Hezbollah supporters, neo-Nazis, and conspiracy theorists that the corporate media had warned us were coming, oddly, never showed their faces. Clearly, the built kippahs scared them off. Or maybe it was the counter-demonstrators. Hundreds of anti-Semites, including prominent German government officials, Israeli diplomats, Antifa factions, members of the local Jewish community, and Bild subscribers, confronted the march, wearing kippahs, waving Israeli flags, displaying giant MAGA banners, shouting "Long live Israel" and "Free Gaza from Hamas," and giving the marchers the finger, and so on, which, I found a little confusing, as the last time I checked, Trump was still Hitler, and Antifa were supposedly a bunch of anarchists. In any event, the hysteria has subsided. Berlin and Israel appear to have survived. The Jews can come back out of hiding, although it isn't quite clear whether Germany wants them to wear their kippahs in public now or not. Hopefully, we'll be receiving some sort of official directive from Commissioner Klein, or perhaps Axel Springer. Axel Springer is the publications magnate Rupert Murdoch of Germany. But seriously, you can't really blame the Germans for going a little overboard with their anti-Semitism hysteria, or for being reluctant to criticize Israel. It wasn't all that long ago that their parents and grandparents were hailing Hitler and systematically murdering millions of Jews, or looking the other way while it happened. Most of the Germans I'm acquainted with still feel kind of awful about that, which isn't terribly surprising, is it? I mean, imagine, if you're one of my American readers, if some other country conquered the USA and put our political and military leaders on trial for all the war crimes they've committed and for the millions of people they've systematically murdered, and taught our children the truth about our history. That might give you some idea of how most Germans feel about the Nazis and the Holocaust. So yes, Germans are a bit hypersensitive about anything resembling anti-Semitism, and they tend to conflate opposition to Israel with hatred of the Jewish people, despite the fact that Israel is doing a pretty convincing impression of the Nazis, what with its ethnic cleansing, walls, ghettos, sadistic goons, propaganda, and so on. Many Germans also overcompensate for their feelings of shame about the Holocaust by displaying an awkward fascination and enthusiasm for anything Jewish. Like many liberal Americans fetishize Native and African Americans. So that might explain the built kippah nonsense. No, I'm not mocking or scolding the Germans. They're still trying to work their history out. I'm just trying to track the propaganda and cynical emotional manipulation that we are increasingly being subjected to as the global capitalist ruling classes wage their war on populism. The Quds Day panic of 2019 is just one example. There are many more, both manufactured and all too real. The Charlottesville Nazis, Charlottesville 2, the MAGA bomber, the Tree of Life shooting, the Christchurch attack, Jussie Smollett, MAGA hat smirk boy in Washington. And the list goes on, pretty much as it always has. I'm sorry if this comes as a shock to anyone, but the world has always contained a minority of racist and anti-Semitic whack jobs. They didn't suddenly start murdering people when Brexit passed and Trump got elected. They've been doing that for quite some time. And of course, there is still anti-Semitism in Germany. Saxony is crawling with neo-Nazis. And Iran really would like to wipe out Israel. just as Israel would like to wipe out Iran. None of this is in any way new or shocking to anyone who has been paying attention. The only thing that has significantly changed since November 8, 2016, is the official narrative we're being fed, in which anyone opposing global capitalism and the hegemony of neoliberal ideology is either a Russian or some kind of Nazi, and a new anti-Semitism or fascism panic is whipped up for us on a monthly basis. The Quds Day panic of 2019, like the Charlottesville Kristallnacht of 2017, is going to be rerun over and over in endless variations until 2020, or whenever the global capitalist ruling classes manage to restore normality, with a capital N. By that time, Israeli sports teams will probably be wearing little Palestinians on their caps. Think of the Cleveland Indians. Julian Assange will be locked away in Supermax. Who? And satirists like me, C.G. Hopkins, who writes this, well, I think you know. You're listening to Aware on the Air. We're talking about identity politics and U.S. war making today. Comment from Glenn Ford, the Black Agenda Report executive editor. The title of this piece is Black Lives Matter Founder Launches Huge Project to Shrink Black Lives. Alicia Garza and her crew conducted what they that's the Black Lives Matter directors. Alicia Garza and her crew conducted what they claim is the biggest survey of black political opinion ever, but failed to ask a single question about foreign policy. Alicia Garza, of Black Lives Matter fame, last week introduced her latest project in the pages of the New York Times. A survey of, quote, more than 31,000 black people from all 50 states to determine, as the headline announced, what black people want. The Black Census Project, quote, is the largest independent survey of black people ever conducted in the United States, wrote Garza. A collaboration of Garza's Black Futures Lab, Color of Change, Demos, and Socioanalytic Research, the project, quote, trained more than 100 black organizers and worked with some 30 grassroots organizations to elicit black people's views on a range of domestic subjects, but asked not a single question related to war and peace. Garza and company have thus performed a kind of lobotomy on the black polity in the United States, excising from public policy discussion black Americans' views on the nation's endless military and economic wars against people of color around the world. Garza's team appears to have operated on the premise that black people have no opinion on the death of millions and the destructions of whole societies, crimes that are committed in their name by the U.S. government. As if black Americans don't see the connection between ever-expanding war budgets and constantly shrinking domestic social spending. The project is structured as if African Americans are provincial boobs who don't give a damn about foreign affairs or the intersection of U.S. foreign and domestic policy. What is perfectly clear is that the survey is designed to influence the election strategies of the Democratic Party, whose candidates, she writes, failed to, quote, address the issues that affect black communities or meaningfully court them, close quote. Instead, time, quote again, time, money, and effort are expended to identify and cater to moderate white voters who are already fickle about politicians and political parties. This has long been the Democratic establishment strategy, but they doubled down on it after the 2016 election, when analysts proclaimed that the left's undue focus on identity politics sent moderate white voters to the Republican side, close quote. That's Garza. Most corporate Democratic candidates also avoid foreign policy issues whenever possible. Garza and her corporate philanthropy-funded crew impose the same strictures on black discussion in hopes of creating a saleable electoral campaign product for Democrats. The survey's webpage is keen to advertise that the 31,000 black census respondents are, quote, highly engaged in election, Not only did more than 73% report voting in 2016, but 40% also report some other form of electoral activity, such as engaging as donors, volunteers, or canvassers. Close quote. The message is, these are folks that need to be put to work on some worthy Democrat's campaign. Quote, as the unwavering base of the Democratic Party, if the politically engaged black population ceased to vote and gave up on the system, it would upend the Democratic Party and have devastating effects on our democracy as a whole, says Garza's Black Census Project, and a transparent pitch for its availability to save the party and, quote, the system, close quote. The survey is quite methodical in providing questions to guide candidates in navigating black domestic political views. It confirms that the black political consensus on economic justice at home remains intact, with large majorities of respondents favoring high taxes on the rich, increased minimum wages, and affordable health, higher education, and housing. The survey does not ask if any of these things should be a right. Predictably, 3/4 of those surveyed want cops made accountable for their misconduct, and just over half want community boards created to supervise police departments. But the surveyors were not interested in black people's views on U.S. military violence abroad, or the impact of U.S. policies on poverty in the world, or anything at all about Africa, a continent the United States has militarily occupied since 2008. We do learn that President Obama, who effectuated the occupation, enjoys an 85% approval rating among respondents, as does Black Lives Matter, which conducted the survey. The survey is a hustle to make Garza, Color of Change, and their already deeply connected financial backers bigger players in the Democratic Party, without challenging lawless U.S. empire, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said more than half a century ago, and as Malcolm X hammered home till his dying breath. Garza knows what she's doing. The Movement for Black Lives platform, titled A Vision for Black Lives, Policy Demands for Black Power, Freedom, and Justice, is quite radical in its demands to end the domestic war on black people and on reparations, disinvestment of oppressive government and economic institutions, economic justice, community control, and decriminalizing black political activity. But it puts forward no demands on U.S. foreign policy, instead offers an apology. Quote, while the movement's platform largely focuses on the implementation of domestic policies that will advance black communities in America, the movement also recognizes that patriarchy, exploitative capitalism, militarism, and white supremacy know no borders, close quote. But Garza knows the borders of what is acceptable to the corporate Democratic Party and adheres to the limits imposed by the fat cats, who are also among her donors. This is sometimes called political capture of dissidents by the ruling class. However, the term capture hardly fits when the prey is begging to be caught. As Black academic Jennifer Nash writes in this week's edition of the Black Agenda Report Book Forum, black feminists tend to hold, quote, proprietary attachments to intersectionality, to keep it close, to guard it, close quote. Yet Alicia Garza pretends, for Black Census Project purposes, to be blind to the intersection between U.S. slaughter of millions of non-white people abroad and the mass black incarceration regime at home. She doesn't respect black folks enough to even ask if they approve or disapprove of their government's conduct abroad. The absence of foreign policy questions is a deliberate ploy to make the project and its players palatable to imperialists. Garza not only pretends that she doesn't see the connection between the trillion-dollar U.S. military budget versus endless austerity for human needs programs, she has overseen a survey that pretends the rest of black America is also blind and dumb. Her survey is an insult to the black radical tradition, which is rooted in solidarity with the oppressed peoples of the world and has resulted in black America winning allies and emulators around the globe. Fortunately, an organization exists that will never forget the 6 million Congolese that have been slaughtered to date as a result of U.S. foreign policy, the worst genocide since World War II, and which fights daily to bring Washington's endless wars to a halt, the Black Alliance for Peace. But that's not the kind of project that corporate billionaires fund. That's from Glenn Ford, the editor of Black Agenda Report, which we recommend in general. You have been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, recorded in the studios of Urbana Public Television on June 11th in the 24th week of 2019. Another week in which the U.S. is continuing to bomb 8 countries and to threaten China, Russia, Venezuela, and Iran. Our remit is to comment on the war news that the American media, owned by the U.S. 1%, puts aside and ignores, not by accident. The U.S. government continues to aid the Saudis in their vicious war in Yemen, and the Israelis in their racist oppression of the Palestinian people, both part of the major U.S. foreign policy goal of controlling the energy resources of the Middle East, a weapon against the international competitors of the American 1%. The Israeli government has murdered protesters at the fence with Gaza, the world's largest open-air prison camp. The U.S. supports that, primarily because Israel is a stationary aircraft carrier for the U.S. control of Mideast gas and oil. Such outrages cannot be dismissed as something for which we're not responsible. In the Illinois legislature, our local representatives refused to vote against using University of Illinois funds to support Israeli apartheid, something Representative Evans, for example, would never have done for South African apartheid. We'll conclude today with a video interview by U.S. Special Rapporteur on Torture, Niles Meltzer, who visited journalist Julian Assange on May 9th with 2 doctors to assess Assange's status. Meltzer rightly pins the blame on the U.S., UK, Sweden, and yet Ecuador for Assange's poor health status. Assange is currently in jail over bail skipping, but really we all know why Assange is under such pressure to be shipped to the U.S. The U.S. wants him for punishment for publishing the Afghan and Iraq war logs, and they're raising, so far, evidenceless claim of assisting Manning in obtaining the material WikiLeaks published. So while U.S. war crimes go unpunished, those that expose the war crimes have been persecuted and imprisoned. Meltzer gives a summary of what could happen to Assange. He says, quote, Mr. Assange is no longer capable of participating in his own court hearings. This is a very good interview to put the entire case of WikiLeaks publications and Sweden's ongoing preliminary, purposely slow-walked, investigation into allegations of sexual impropriety in context, including whether Assange could get a fair trial in the U.S. No, he can't, as Meltzer lays out, and describing what Sweden alleges as rape. Niels Meltzer, the UN official, says, I think it's also important to point out that what is also called a rape allegation is not by any stretch what would be called, rape in English or any other language than Swedish in the world, and I know what I'm talking about because I do speak Swedish. Then what this rape allegation refers to is an offense that doesn't involve any violence. Essentially, he, Assange, is being accused or alleged to have intentionally ripped a condom during consensual intercourse with a woman. She says it was intention. He says it was an accident. And so predictably, this is something no one will ever be able to prove. The piece of evidence that was submitted to the prosecution, the condom, was actually examined and did not have any DNA on it from him or anyone else or from the complainant. So it seems that this was a new condom that had been submitted as evidence against him. So there's no evidence that he committed any offense, and still the Swedish law also prohibits the prosecution from talking publicly about sexual offenses that are under investigation, and from day one, basically, they informed the public that Mr. Assange was suspected of rape. And so this was clearly a misleading allegation. And they went out of their way, really, to prevent Mr. Assange from making his own voice heard to defend himself publicly against these allegations without at the same time exposing himself to extradition to the U.S., where he had a credible fear of being exposed there to serious violations of his human rights. He has now been charged, there are 18 charges under the Espionage Act, which was designed by the Wilson administration to stop opposition to America's entry in the First World War. The Espionage Act was used by President Obama more than any other president in history, more than all previous presidents put together, to shut down this sort of publication about what the U.S. was actually doing in the Middle East. These notes are from our researcher, Jeff Nicholson. He points out that Rupley is RT's no commentary, footage only camera affiliate that captures a lot of events merely by dead rolling a camera aimed at something. Rupley got the exclusive of Assange being pulled out of the Ecuadorian embassy by the British police, and now they have the exclusive of Assange inside Belmarsh prison. No other Western news organizations were recording it. This has turned out to be very embarrassing when these other outlets needed to license footage from Rupley, after the RT group, after having made so many accusations of wrongdoing against Russia and RT. Recall that RT has been explicitly named as part of Russiagate. RT was alleged to have somehow helped put Trump in office over Hillary Clinton, but there's no evidence that RT did anything but news reporting, so there's no reason to suspect RT of doing something untoward. RT is also the subject of an Ofcom, the UK media censor, investigation in which RT might have to pay fines or get kicked off of RT airwaves. Meanwhile, no media outlet other than Rupley wants to put the effort into trying to capture the same footage, run Assange-related media captured by others, as appears to be the case with this latest footage of Assange in Belmarsh prison, or interview those who evaluate Assange's condition. But apparently all of the media outlets run WikiLeaks publications revealing war crimes, computer security flaws, notes from previously unpublished emails, summaries of complex bank reports which indicate massive illegalities, and more. Some outlets win awards for their reports based in part on WikiLeaks publications. Isn't this more media hypocrisy? Not an accident, but in favor of the people who own the media. Aware on the Air is produced and directed by Jason Liggett and Crofton Coleman, with Andrew Scholarly, thanks to whom also this program and others like it will be available on YouTube and archive.org. We rely on a researcher, Jeff Nicholson, whose blog Digital Citizen we recommend highly. We steal from it regularly. There's a link to it on our Facebook page. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about, but Americans don't. Assange, Manning, Snowden, and others, who are truth-tellers persecuted by the U.S. government, and particularly, by the way, by our liberal Democratic Senator Durbin, a shill for the Russiagate propaganda and unconstitutional attacks on the free press, notably in the case of WikiLeaks. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for the members and friends of AWARE, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, saying in the words of the late newsman Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.